Hello, good morning, and welcome to another edition of the Jamf Breakfast Club. For those of you who've been here before, welcome back, and for first-time visitors, also welcome. Before I introduce today's guest speakers, I just wanted to make some announcements with regards to future breakfast clubs. Sadly, we won't be here in April, but that's because we're going to be at the BET show in March in just over 2.5 weeks' time. So you can come see us on stand SF51, as you can see across your screen at the moment. We're going to be right across from the main arena, and we've got some fantastic guest speakers for you to see there. So we really look forward to welcoming you to BET in March. I would now like to introduce, without further ado, we've got two guest speakers for you today, so I'm really delighted to invite John Jones and Matt Warne. Good morning, chaps. How are we doing?
Yeah, morning, Craig. Very well, thanks.
Morning, Craig. Excellent. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you. I'm just going to get you to introduce yourselves before we get into it. Matt, we'll start with you since you're at the top of the screen there.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So my name is Matt Warne, as seen on the screen here. Very, very handy caption. So I work at RGS The Grange, which is a rather, well, one of the largest prep schools in the RGS family of schools. So we're about 360, 370 pupils. From reception right through to year 6. So I'm a senior leader, and I take the lead in computing and digital learning, working closely with John.
Fab. And John?
My name's John Jones, as Matt quite rightly pointed out, which is pointed out in the subtitles. I'm the Director of Innovation across all 4 of the RGS Worcester schools. I'm a teacher. That was obviously the main thing that we all do. But I also manage the digital learning program, which basically means that pupils and teachers have access to technology in order to enhance teaching and learning.
Fab. And you mentioned 4 schools there, and I think it's quite important just to point out for those that are not familiar with the sort of setup at RGS. John, would you maybe give us a quick overview of the sort of makeup of those 4 schools?
Sure. My office is based in the senior school, which is just down the road on the Tithing, and we have children from year 7 to year 13 there. Each bringing an iPad to school. We've got 2 prep schools, the Grange, where Matt works, which is the larger prep school, and Springfield, which is the smaller prep school, which is just across the road from the senior school. And the most recent addition to the RGS Worcester family of schools is RGS Dodderhill, which is in Droitwich, and is a girls' school. Well, actually, last summer we took on the first boys in the middle school there, in the primary school, sorry. So we have boys from years 3 to 6, and in the nursery, whilst the senior school, which is from year 7 to year 11, is still just for girls. And they've been on a very interesting journey, because obviously once they joined the family, the pandemic wasn't that far around the corner, so their use of technology was pretty rapid.
It was accelerated, and as I'm sure many people joining today will have been in a similar position, and I think we'll get into that a little bit later. But in terms of using Apple technology in RGS, that started a long time ago. I think was it back in 2014, or was it even before then, John? In terms of when you sort of took your first sort of steps into using iPad.
2014 was the official year that the DLP was launched, but I know technology's been in the school for a number of years before that. The DLP was the start of the one-to-one movement, if you like, and since then we've gone from strength to strength. It's lots of schools are doing similar things now, but having that culture in place for such a long time really makes a difference on a day-to-day basis. Yeah,
absolutely. And Matt, when did you first get into the sort of whole Apple kind of world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I joined RGS just at the very cusp, really, of the DLP kicking in, sort of 2015. So it was a really exciting time to join the school and to sort of see, we had a real buzz with the staff team, and so many people wanted in on something that was very new and innovative. Prior to that, I suppose my background has been primary school teacher for probably about 17 years now. I worked for the rugby club, Worcester Warriors, for 2 years, where we were completely immersed with technology. engaging pupils, and that was kind of the first time I saw, I think what meaningful tech can actually do, how it can really promote learning, encouragement, engagement in something, and it's so tangible. So that was the start of the journey, really, and haven't looked back. It's been a bit of a whirlwind these last 7 to 8 years.
Fantastic. Now, before we get into the sort of the main topic today, I was just going to remind people to pop your questions into the chat, and you can see the banners come up there as well. So yeah, we will get to the questions either at the end or as we go through. If they're sort of relevant to what we're talking about, then we'll absolutely make sure that we try and answer as much as we can. But please do pop your questions in for Matt and John. Now, today we're here to talk about blended learning. That is the theme of today's conversation. I think it's a good place to start around defining what blended learning means to RGS, what it means to you both, because it's got many interpretations and none of them are necessarily wrong. But in your context, what does blended learning mean for RGS?
I think for us, it essentially means integrating traditional methods of teaching with technology. It's as simple as that. You're quite right, Craig. We're in an era now of mobile learning, hybrid learning, all sorts of different learnings going on in schools. But whilst blended learning does have different interpretations, and I think even from teacher to teacher, there's slightly different understandings of what it means. But simply for us, it means that we use technology where it adds meaning to learning, and where a pen and paper or going outside into forest school, which Matt does brilliantly, is a better way of learning. That's what we do.
Matt, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. I think in terms of sort of a pedagogical focus on this, if we're sort of inspiring staff and we're giving them technology, it's about making choices, isn't it? And that's been a cultural sort of shift and journey, really, where I feel staff are now inspired. They have the confidence to know, when to actually use the tech and when not to. And I think that's really important. In the early days, you might have found staff who were just, I wouldn't say pressured, but felt that, oh, wow, I've been given this, I need to use it, and trying to sort of force learning through tech. And I think that can be the biggest sort of crux, the biggest sort of mistake of, you look at the SAMA model, and it's about, when we use it and it can actually do things we couldn't do before. But it's about breaking that down for staff, really, and just getting them to reflect on tasks they do. Are we just substituting for the sake of it? If not, then I think, as John alluded to, the traditional methods where we'd go to, you can't replace a reading book. The fine motor skills needed for pupils in writing are fundamental. But then when we can use, AR, we can do some book creation, podcasting, then we couldn't do those without tech. So that's when, we will find our teachers will turn to technology to aid and improve and inspire in the classrooms.
And would you say it's almost proven it's working if it is just sort of like another tool that you would pick up and use as you would a pen or pencil, or is there's not a sort of expectation that it's used for certain lessons or at certain times or for certain things?
I think teachers have found that they can use technology now in a variety of different ways, but when the technology is taken away, the day-to-day workflows become impossible. And that's not to say that they're only there because they're there for the sake of it. They're there because they reduce workload. They're there because they enhance the ability for teachers to provide detailed feedback in a variety of different ways. And we've spoken to teachers that have been at RGS and left and gone to other schools where they don't have the same tech setup, and they've struggled, not because they can't revert back to what they used to do, but simply because they're not used to it. They're not used to those slower ways of working, those slower ways of communicating. They're not used to that the lack of digital culture that we enjoy. And I think there's plenty of examples at each of our schools of the way that digital workflows have really made a meaningful difference to teaching and learning. And you can't hide from those if you come to look around any of our schools.
And I think that leads nicely into this sort of idea of no going back. Once you've been exposed to that way of working and seen the benefits of it, seen the impact of it as well as much as anything, I know we were chatting before with regards to obviously the last few years around the pandemic and all the challenges that school leaders, teachers have had to deal with there. One thing that we spoke about was some of those positive consequences of that in terms of digital workflows. I wonder if you could both just tell everyone a little bit about your approach there, some of the tools you used, and then some of the benefits you've seen coming out the other side now.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So I suppose sort of leading up to the pandemic, we'd already been sort of running the DLP for a number of years. So in the early days, we were quite sort of app happy, trying different things, loads of risk taking, working out what works and what doesn't. And as we've come through, as we've matured the DLP, we've started to just simplify things. We've got some very basic workflow models between the schools, which I think helps staff. That they're not trying to constantly work out which apps are going to, we've got a really, really clear system. So that moment that we did go into lockdown, it was in place. It was a really good challenge and it was a good test for staff. And we certainly stepped out our comfort zone. But in terms of the infrastructure, it was there to be used. We use Shobi as a digital workflow. I'd probably describe that as our digital glue. That kind of brings everything together. So everything kind of goes through it to get to the other side, whether it's pupil engagement, parental engagement, or just, marking and feeding back to pupils or class discussions. So everything has to have this, a simplified way. And if schools don't have that, it becomes a very jumbled approach, doesn't it? So, just look at what is essential. And we had those in place already, John, didn't we, leading into lockdown? So I think teachers felt they had a scaffold, they had something they could rely on of which to then build on and support pupils during the pandemic.
I think building on what you just said, Matt, that culture that existed meant that we were able to shift to remote learning from day one. There was no gap in pupils' progress. Which was quite remarkable, actually. We weren't the only school that did that, but there weren't many. And again, that simply comes down to the teacher skills and the pupil confidence, etc., all being there, ready to be utilised. And that's not to say we didn't get anything wrong. Of course we did, but we all make mistakes. We learn from those mistakes. As long as you learn from the mistakes, they're worth making, I think. So we adjusted things like the length of the school day, the homework expectations, because there was a bit of a grey area about homework when you're kind of working from home. What does it mean? So there's little things like that we didn't even anticipate. But the as Matt said, the fact we had all those things in place, the fact we had Shobi, the fact we used Google already, the fact we all had devices made that shift possible. And I spoke about Dodderhill briefly earlier. They were much newer to that digital culture than the rest of us, yet they still managed to do the same thing. Those teachers there really did an incredible job, I think. We all did, but to not have that digital culture in place yet still do what the other schools managed to do is a remarkable achievement. Absolutely.
No, I love that, and I love this idea of Shobi being your digital glue. And we actually had we had Shobi Abdul Chouhan from Shobi on last month talking about all the wonderful things that they do, and that's. Obviously, it's an app that's been around for a long time now, and we've seen a lot of schools really embedding that. A question that came in sort of related to that: is there any other apps that you see as your sort of core set? John, you mentioned the Google apps there as well. Is there any apps that you see as your sort of core set across maybe all of your schools?
It's a really interesting question. What we do have, I mean, I can see the question popping up in the chat. We do have a specific workflow model that's different in each school. And within that, we've got Shobi's as Matt said, the glue, if you like, Google Drive in the background with all the Google Docs as well and Sheets, etc. But Apple Classroom's a massive part of that workflow as well, to make sure that we know what the pupils are doing on their devices. And again, it's a cultural thing. Once pupils know that Google Classroom exists and you have the ability to lock devices and look at screens, even if you're not using it, they think you can. So it kind of that starts to generate that sort of positive learning atmosphere. Each department I'll speak for the senior school here, because obviously there's different workflows in different schools, not different to Shobi and Google, but underneath that with those sort of day-to-day apps, learning apps, if you like. Each department's got their own workflow where they'll use specific bespoke apps for that department. But the main things we use, as Matt said, are shared across all 4 of the schools.
Fab. Another question sort of related to that as well, is with regards to paid apps versus free apps. Obviously, Shobi is a subscription-based app as well, so that's something obviously that's got an ongoing cost. The question is, why would you pay for that, or when there's other free tools available? What's your sort of take on that?
Matt, shall I answer that?
I'll go first if that's all right, John. I felt through when we sort of started off with the DLP, we were paying for lots of different apps and trying things out, and I think that's really important. I suppose when you're pushing this to so many pupils across 4 schools, what you've got to ensure is quality, and I think quality's got to come first. There can't be any compromise, especially when we're talking about workflow. If there's any flaws in your workflow, there's going to be issues, aren't there? And that's where there might be a negative culture. There might be some changes that are going to have a negative effect. So in terms of sort of, I think, investing in the workflow, that is the fundamental. In terms of everything that goes around that, yes, certainly we use lots of free apps, but we use very good free apps. I think the standard of the standard offering on an iPad now is unbelievable, isn't it? In terms of creativity, when you look at sort of the everyone can create, and you look at clips, you've got GarageBand, you've got Pages, you could do everything with the Apple apps, and I think they're getting better and better. But there are a load of apps that we will use that do have huge impact, Scavenger AR, and those sorts of tools for unique creativity. But in terms of the investment in Shobi, we've tried lots of different things, because that's important. You don't just go for the most popular products on the market, you actually test. And that's something that has happened over a number of years, looking for flaws, looking for, what are the advantages and disadvantages. And for us, that was the best tool at the time, and continues to be so for what we require from it. And everything feeds into that, really. So.
And John, would you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything Matt says. And I can see another couple of questions popping up about schoolwork, Google Classroom, MS Teams, etc. Our mantra really isn't. It's more about the pedagogy. The technology is vitally important, obviously, but if you're using Teams and you're using it well, that's amazing. We've got an Apple ecosystem which uses third-party apps like Shobi and Google, and it works. If it didn't work, we'd review it and change it. But the success of the school, the success of the pupils, the learning, the teaching, are all very high indicators that the ecosystem works for us. That's not to say that the equivalents don't do just as good a job. I've got contacts across the country who we regularly catch up in a variety of different forms. We've got a digital learning strategy. I speak to other independent schools and people do similar jobs to me. They're not all Apple, and we all agree that it's not the van that delivers your grocery that's important. It's the content of the grocery. Is it full of healthy goods and food? And if that's the case, then we're all in the same place. And look, if something came along that was better than Shobi for us, then we'd happily change. We look at what to do, but it doesn't exist yet in terms of our setup. And every school's got to remember that they're unique, and what works for them may not work elsewhere. As I said, the quality of the Google and the Microsoft stuff is superb as well. And I'm sure at schools that use that, they get equally positive results.
Would you say it's almost more about not the tool so much as the consistency, that we've got a consistent approach? We all use the same thing. We can support each other in adopting that tool. There's, rather than, we've seen it before, and perhaps you've worked in institutions before where it's been a little bit more of a free-for-all, and you've got lots of people doing different things and all equally good. But
actually, Craig, I think the most obvious example of where we have changed is to Jamf. And this isn't my sort of bit where I start going how brilliant Jamf is. But there's a case study right there. We used a different MDM beforehand. I inherited this, by the way. This is Jamf was something that was just being introduced when I moved to RGS Worcester. But I agreed with the move entirely because we were doing exactly the same place in my old job. We're doing exactly the same thing. We're moving away from our previous MDM to Jamf. And in fact, we've sped up the adoption now. So we're 2 years ahead of where we should have been, purely because the product is so good. And you can apply that to the hardware and the software we use across the whole schools. If there's something better along that's going to make things better for teachers and learning and pupils, then we would move.
And we were chatting before with regards to parental engagement, and obviously Shobi's got some fantastic parental tools in there as well, so parents can engage with the work that's being set, etc. You mentioned before with Jamf, there was some of the tools in there that parents, the feedback was really good, and it meant that there was an expectation that would be used as they move from prep school to senior school, etc.
Yeah, so Craig, I suppose before, our previous MDM, basically pupils were bring your own device from year 5 onwards through the school. We provide iPads from reception to year 4. So we were getting iPads coming onto site. They pick up the Wi-Fi, and you're still dealing with everything that you'd have at home. There's games. There's iPads being, low storage issues, messaging being readily available. So as soon as we moved across the Jamf, really enabled us to sort of whitelist the set of apps we wanted. The iPad suddenly overnight became a learning tool rather than something that did some really meaningful things, but could also be seen as a distraction. And so for us, that was a bit of a game changer. We huge engagement with parents. They need to be on board with what you're doing. We've done lots of events where we've got them in, and we've done live demos of how they can actually have these tools as well. As soon as the iPad goes home and hits the home network, the games reappear. But the parents can also have settings on there to make the games disappear, or for certain apps to be seen for, let's say, the homework hour. From the moment they get home till 7 o'clock, parents can set so that only, Pages, Shobi and Safari are available to pupils. So, what we've given really to parents now is the tools of which to manage something that is now resembles a learning device as well as a personal device at home. But that divide is so much clearer for us now. For these pupils going into senior school, suddenly to revert back to the previous MDM, sure you can understand, and parents would probably appreciate this. There was concern. They didn't have the control they had before. So, we were open, we listened to parents, we listened to feedback, and now that's rolled right throughout the school. And again, that is a fundamental key to the success of the one-to-one deployment.
No, thanks for sharing that. And I think this is where, if I can do the little Jamf pluggy bit briefly, if you excuse me, but this is obviously why you choose something that's specific to Apple, it's specific to education, because we understand these needs that devices sometimes need to be set up in slightly different ways for different environments, and bring your own device and parental contribution models are incredibly popular, and they remain to be so. So having that flexibility, I think, is really, really important, and it's something that certainly we've had feedback from schools, from trusts across the country that say, hey, our parents would like this flexibility to have devices in different states at different times. So thanks for sharing that. We've got lots of questions coming in, so we're going to take questions in about 4 or 5 minutes. I did want to ask Matt a question with regards to professional development, picking up on some of the points around that ease of transition into remote learning, but not just remote learning in the classroom. You had Dodderhill coming on board that was a bit newer to it. And one thing that I loved reading in your Apple Distinguished Schools book, which you can see on the bookstore, the Apple bookstore, I recommend you go have a look at that, was your Digital Leaders Programme. Matt, could you just tell us a little bit about that, how it came about, the impact of that?
Yeah, certainly. There's a few on the wall behind me, actually. Sorry, that's right there. So yeah, we started. I've always been a believer. I think if you've got a culture in the school where you've got teachers on board, the main client really is the pupils, isn't it? It's about their engagement, their progress. So we've always had, and we always will, and I'm sure all these schools listening have got pupils in their school who are inspirational, who get it, who love using tech. So it's about using the pupils as a vehicle, really, using their skills. So what we did a number of years ago now, we went for sort of the ADE route with this, actually. So I invited them to apply. They had to produce a 2-minute video as to why a familiar model here, why we should choose them. So already they've got a set goal. They're working to a time frame. There's a requirement for them to actually put a lot of effort into this. If they were successful, they went through to an interview round. So myself and the headmaster, Gareth Hughes, would sit down one-to-one and we would give them 10 minutes, a proper interview. There'd be formal letters were sent home as well, saying if they were accepted, if they weren't quite ready for the role and need to reapply next year. But we soon had, a set of pupils who were really, really ready to do battle. And I wanted to give them the opportunities to lead. All these jobs of the future that aren't created yet will require collaborative work, innovation, creativity. So I wanted to give them these skills. So we've had pupils go to Birmingham University. They've presented in front of 60 head teachers as to why tech is important. I want to get them on stages, and I want to, use that raw passion. A few years ago, we actually trained the digital leaders up as Apple teachers. And this was a real test of the school culture, because then we had teachers training to be Apple teachers at the same time that pupils were becoming or had already become Apple teachers. And then we had pupils teaching teachers on a Monday lunchtime to become Apple teachers. You've got assemblies where you're announcing pupils are Apple teachers and also teachers are, and teachers were absolutely fine with that. They were happy to sort of take that shift, that deep dive, because the pupils were really taking the lead on this. Having their own device, meant that they were being so creative in terms of the tools they were using. And then that changed the way that we were teaching. We were now giving pupils options for how they present their work. And then currently, with our Trilby TVs across the 4 schools, we've now got pupils creating content on the TVs, teaching teachers and pupils about tips and tricks, accessibility options, how to, use iPads efficiently. So there's a real culture of change that hasn't just happened. It's taken a number of years to get there. But we're really proud of these young leaders who are doing some great things.
Absolutely love that. I love this idea of the interview process and the video, and this is preparing them for life skills, right? This is not just for the digital leader program, which is fantastic in its own right, but helping to build those life skills that you say that's going to be so important. We're kind of on the half hour now, which takes us nicely into the Q&A section. We've had loads of questions coming in, but please keep posting. I will just pick some out here, and I've got a couple of my own, but I do want to get to the ones that are coming from the audience. John, I'll direct this one to you. The question is, can you give me some examples of how technology makes a difference to the classroom experience? And it says you gave one example of making podcasts earlier. More ideas would be great.
Yeah, I mean, where do we begin with that question? There's the sort of creative side of things where children can explain their understanding of a given topic using film, using podcast, using animation, using coding, using digital arts. There's the more sort of mundane but highly important aspect of digital learning, which is workflow, feedback. So all these things become possible. And the funny thing is that when you walk into an RGS classroom, all these things happen as a given. Yeah. They're not unusual, and even if with video feedback. I was chatting to a science teacher earlier this week, a PGC student, in fact, who popped into my office to a chat about digital learning from the University of Worcester, and he teaches physics. Well, I'm not a physician by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm a primary school teacher initially, and I obviously taught science at primary school. And I remember in my old job, the amount of time some children took just to draw the diagrams out and then to write a hypothesis down. They spent the whole time doing these things, and the actual practicals, there was no time for them at the end of the lesson. So using digital tools, for example, you can record a hypothesis in 30 seconds. And that helps children who aren't necessarily gifted and talented at writing or struggle with grammar, etc. It doesn't detract from their ability to hypothesize. Likewise, they can take a picture of the tools for the science experiment, label it on something like Clips or Keynote, and then they're ready to go with the science, which is the important part of the lesson. So it's that cognitive load. You can reduce cognitive load by using technology in thoughtful ways. Back to the feedback question, teachers are able to leave voice feedback, video feedback on work, on a piece of art, for example, that's handed in with a photo. You can literally dot around on Showbie where you're going to leave your feedback on different parts. This is a great drawing. This needs a bit of work, etc. All this stuff isn't possible with technology, and it doesn't. Music, using GarageBand 15 years ago, to create what you can do now in 25 minutes would have taken all day, and a whole sort of orchestra. We had a chap called David Kirtland who popped into Dodderhill before half term to
I know David.
To do an iPad band, and by the end of it, they're all banging out "Living on a Prayer" by Bon Jovi. And that would have taken weeks before, and so it's that sort of thing. And the kids do exams. Once they do exams, they go to university or go and get a job. And there isn't a job that I can think of in the 21st century Britain that doesn't use technology in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's key to all this, isn't it? It's that preparation for that world that they're inevitably going to step into. Yeah,
100%. I think one thing that I've picked up talking to you and other schools as well, it's really just all about the learning. It's all about the pedagogy. It's almost, if that's in place and that's right, it's just a vehicle for that to happen, and to happen in a more efficient way, a better way, a more creative way. And I think that's really is a key thing. I suppose another question that's kind of coming in, it's a bit of the flip side of that, is some of the challenges that you face with teaching and learning with one-to-one devices. What's been the challenges that you've saw? Matt, I'll direct that one to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, I'm just racking my brain over the last few years, Craig, about some advice we'd potentially offer. I think I'd probably go back to get a workflow, start small, start building. I think believe in your staff team. You need some digital champions. We've always had these across the 4 schools, and allow those 1 or 2 individuals to run with it and share their experience. Try and create a culture of sharing, of risk taking. That needs to be. Teachers need to be given the responsibility, the freedom to try different things. I think we need to talk about that failure. Sometimes things aren't going to work out, and that's absolutely fine, but it's about the reflective tools that you use. I think one tip that's really helped is in our staff meetings. So religiously, every staff meeting, we have about 15, 20 minutes where we just open the room up. What's worked well? What hasn't worked well? Let's talk the DLP. Let's talk about impact. And I deliberately try and get some different voices in the staff room. We might have a few digital champions, but I'll try and sort of organically work with different teachers, try and get different voices, because I think that is so important. You might have these digital champions who will go with it. You're going to have staff who might feel they are going to be left behind. So you need to work with them as well. Try and create that sort of culture. Try and work with all your staff team, and be receptive to different levels of experience as well. One size doesn't always fit all, so it's just trying to bring your staff team through together. John, anything you'd add to that?
Challenges, I mean, I think the ever-changing landscape of the digital world is a consistent challenge for everybody. One app comes along, it gets updated. So it's the CPD, it's the professional development, and it's not a challenge we haven't been able to rise to. It's an ongoing challenge to making sure that everyone is prepared and able to do what we want them to do in the classroom of digital technology. So making sure that the iPad OS, for example, is within a certain time frame, because obviously if it gets to a time frame beyond where you can update the latest one, all of a sudden pupils can't do the work. So it's about managing all that is a consistent challenge, and not getting bogged down, as Matt said, in the vast array of apps and tech that exists out there. When you go to the Bet Show, obviously do go and visit the Jamf stand, but amidst all the stands, there's so much to get your head round, and it's daunting. That's a huge challenge, I think, because you've got some tools out there that you really do think, what on earth would people buy that for? Then you see them sort of signing up to these products that we've got no lifespan, and no real a place in a school to an extent. So it's scrabbling around amidst that sort of that array of tech to find what is meaningful is a consistent challenge, but one I think some of us actually quite enjoy, because it gives us a chance to have a look at what's out there. And certainly a bet in a few weeks, I'm really excited to get back to that and actually see people again, because it's been too long.
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely get that with this. There's so many apps, there's so many different tools you can use, and we're trying to do our bit to help people navigate that. So we have something called Jamf Marketplace. We've got solution partners, which include some of the ones you've already mentioned, actually, which Shelby TV, Explain Everything, and we will be working with those providers that bit as well. So a little kind of plug there for that. Conscious of the fact, keen to get through some of these questions. There's quite a few questions that are sort of what we call kind of operational. They're kind of tied together. So I'll paraphrase some of these. Someone was asking about the kind of makeup of the 4 schools, the size of the schools, and then I thought it'd be useful to talk about how, because you sort of minister the program slightly differently. Matt, you touched on this with regards to the bring your own element and devices that are provided. Give us a touch on the sort of size of the schools and some of the differences with regards to the provision of iPads in those different schools.
Yeah, sorry, do you want me to start from a Grange point of view?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're the largest prep school. We're from 2 through to the age of 11. Yeah, we supply iPads from reception through to year 4. So they're in place. We use Jamf. Year 3 and 4 take them home. So they have those. It's a really nice sort of transition in between sort of the bring your own device scheme. Year 5 pupils, they purchase their own device. We often use sort of the reseller Albion. And the joy of that now is basically we can put in one mass order, we can get a good discount. Pupils will pick up the device and it is set up ready to go out the box. So that's a huge advantage at the moment for us. One question was about Apple IDs. We strongly encourage, if you use Apple, there's a tool there that allows you to create a child Apple ID. So we get parents on board with this. We show them how to do that. Again, that gives, so in terms of pupils can install apps on their own device, absolutely fine, but they have to request that access from their parents. Again, power to the parents. They've bought the device. They're in charge. So, main messages, iPad stays in a place at home. We try and really get that parental engagement with, it's that sort of community buy-in really to this. So that takes you through to senior school. John, if you want to talk about senior school, and then we'll talk about the differences between Dodderhill and Springfield.
Yeah, certainly. The senior school, our largest cohort come from the Grange, so they're good to go. They come sort of armed with the tools and the understanding of how to use devices, because there's obviously a correlation between the workflows of the prep schools and the senior school. So we're year 7 to year 13. There's approximately 900 pupils there. We're expanding as a school, and that goes right up to year 13 as well. And in the sixth form, you do see pupils bringing in MacBooks as well as their iPads. I think obviously it's fine, and that helps them sometimes with a more functional use of devices for typing, etc. We've got suites of Macs as well, iMacs that pupils use for things you can't do on an iPad.
I see them behind Matt. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So we're very well resourced, but having those devices means we're no longer confined to IT labs, which is a beautiful thing. We have Dodderhill, which numbers there. I think there's about 200 pupils at Dodderhill, and at Springfield, I think there's approximately 100, potentially slightly less. It's a one-form entry school, so it's very different to the Grange. But as we said before, there's a shared culture, but there's also unique identities between all 4 schools, which are lovely. And I'm privileged that I get to visit each school at least once a week. So popping into those different staff rooms is just wonderful, because you really do see different ways of doing things, and even teaching the computing curriculum is different at all 3 schools. The objectives are the same, but one school uses Lego, one school uses Sphero, one school might use microbits to achieve the same objective, and that shared knowledge as well is brilliant when we all catch up and share ideas and resources. It's a really nice place to work, in the sense you've got those 4 schools to work with, and those 4 unique identities underneath that shared umbrella of culture.
Absolutely. And there's some great examples, actually. Again, plugging your ADS book here. Was having a look over that this week. There's some really great examples from each school as you say, I was loving the stuff that you've been doing with Swift Playgrounds, as you say, Sweeros as well from the coding curriculum. So really some cool stuff in there. Just picking up on the Apple ID question. So I think the method that Matt was describing is like a kind of family sharing model, which you can absolutely do, and that works really well in a bring your own type environment. And then just as a sort of reminder to people that using Apple School Manager, you can create institution IDs. So the institution can create managed IDs. So they're not the same as commercial IDs, if you want to call them that they've got the ability to purchase, but that means that obviously you can have managed IDs for children of all ages. So just to kind of pick up on that point. Couple of other questions coming through. There was questions with regards to what product you use. You use Jamf Pro, so I know you're using Jamf School as the product that you use. That's a nice easy one. Some other questions with regards to so with regards to writing. Okay, we talked a little bit about this before. Traditional school and its age, if you like, and its heritage and its history, and maybe an expectation from parents when sending their son or daughter to one of your schools that it will be a traditional type of education. John, what would you say with regards to that? With writing, it's obviously something that I'm guessing you still do a lot of.
Yeah, let's go right back to the start. The first question we asked was about blended learning, and that literally means you use technology and you do traditional things. Now, we are in the UK in an exam system of education whereby no matter what you do, at the end of the day, you've still got GCSEs and A-levels to pass. And as it stands, those GCSEs and A-levels are handwritten. So, of course, from reception, we handwrite. That's not to say handwriting can't be done with an Apple Pencil on an iPad. Now, we don't have mandatory Apple Pencil use yet. We know that these devices cost enough already. However, what we do see is a huge amount of pupils bringing them in now. But you still can't write on an iPad in an exam. So we're back to square one, really, in that sense. And so therefore, if you walk into an English classroom, what you'll tend to find is an iPad on a desk, a book on a desk, a pen on a desk. And when it comes to doing research, when it comes to reading a sort of Shakespearean text, the iPad would be used because of sustainability, because they're interactive, because you've got no video content in there, which you can't get from a textbook necessarily. But when it comes to writing, we use pens and paper where appropriate. And the sad thing is, once they leave university, once they leave the sixth form to go to university or to go to the job, when do they pick up a pen again? It's madness.
Very rarely.
It's madness.
Very, very rarely. It's a question that comes up all the time, actually. And we did a session, I think it was before Christmas, back in December. We had an app developer called Caligo who it's all focused on building those handwriting skills digitally on an iPad with a pencil that they actually make as well, which is pretty cost effective. So check that out. But the intention is not that you always write on the iPad, is that it improves your handwriting on pen and paper and accelerates that.
Exactly. It's you can't avoid it, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending where on you stand on this. We handwrite, we digitally write, we draw in sand. We try and do as many things as possible to make sure children are able to write in as many ways as possible.
Absolutely. Now we are getting to the end here, and I think we could probably talk about this sort of stuff all day. It's been fantastic to talk to you both. But one final question I did want to ask is, we are speaking to a number of people who perhaps have had to sort of flip very quickly and get devices out there into the hands of students to sort of keep continuity of learning going over pandemic. They maybe come back into school, they've got a lot of kit, maybe not too sure what to do with it. Then maybe if they've been in England, they've had devices through DFE. What would your advice be? I'll ask you both that question. And where can they go to get further advice and help and guidance? Matt, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I was going to say that sort of personal learning network is essential. Start reaching out. I think Twitter was fundamental for me a number of years ago in terms of building this PLN. So many people I've got globally now who I can just ask questions to. Apple Regional Training Centres deliver some great content. Have a little look for those as well. I know John's going to talk about the Edtech Hub. which I think is vitally important. But all these vehicles are about, making connections. I'd love to continue some of these conversations. So, if there's questions there, myself and John are pretty active on Twitter, so reach out and we'd love to stay connected and support and answer any questions. We're all in this together. One aim is to educate pupils, isn't it? So, I'd say reach out, start looking for people, start making connections, and start building your own PLN, really. So,
thanks, Matt and John.
Totally agree with everything Matt said. There's a number of sort of PLNs that we belong to. The ADS community, Apple Distinguished Schools, we're both Apple Distinguished Educators. I'm fortunate that I'm a 2013 ADE, so therefore in the best cohort. So thanks to Aaron for reminding me about that this morning. We've also just formed something called the West Midlands Edtech Hub alongside Edtech UK and the chairman of that, Ty Goddard. And what that is a group of like-minded educators from across the West Midlands and slightly beyond, who are regularly now, once a term, because everyone's busy, once a term, hosting an online webinar to discuss meaningful topics around in the digital world, if you like. So the first one we spoke about the digital divide, which matches what your question was, because we are conscious of the amount of schools now that have got tech. The pandemic's not over, but certainly things are returning to normal in schools. And therefore, they've got a great opportunity to do something with this tech. But we're fearful that actually, without the right infrastructure, without the right training, that may not happen, and we will miss a golden opportunity. I'm conscious of time, so as Matt said, do please get in touch with Matt or myself, and we can elaborate on all these points.
Yeah, I think we'll just pop the link to the YouTube channel and the comments there. So yeah, please go and check that out. And yeah, you're very active on Twitter, so go and find the guys on Twitter. We've ran slightly over, but I think it's been some really great conversation. Thanks everyone for your questions. Thanks so much, John and Matt, for joining us this morning. We really, really appreciate it. We hope to see you at BET. We hope to see you all at BET in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll see you back here again, hopefully, for the next edition in May. So thanks once again to our speakers, and have a wonderful day, everyone, and we'll speak to you all soon.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks.
Thanks.